Imagine this. You're sitting in a room full of people, friends, colleagues, maybe even family, and as laughter fills the air, something inside you tightens. You smile when you're supposed to, nod when it's expected, maybe even add a comment or two. But beneath the surface, there's a quiet ache, an invisible wall separating you from the rest. You're present, yet absent. Surrounded, yet utterly alone. It's not that they dislike you, they just don't see you, not really. They hear your words, but not the meaning behind them. They interpret your silence as disinterest, your depth as confusion, your honesty as arrogance. Every attempt to explain yourself only seems to make things worse, as though language itself betrays you the moment it leaves your mouth. And so, you retreat not because you want to, but because the exhaustion of being misunderstood becomes heavier than the loneliness that follows. But here's the haunting paradox. You crave connection more than anything, yet the very act of reaching out seems to push people further away. You long to be understood, but when someone gets too close, you flinch as if understanding might strip away your mystery, your independence, your fragile identity. Why is that? Why do we spend our lives yearning to be seen, only to hide behind masks the moment someone looks too deeply? Why do conversations feel like performances, and relationships like negotiations of selfhood? Why does it seem that the closer you are to discovering who you truly are, the harder it becomes for the world to meet you there? Maybe it's not the world's fault. Maybe the reason you feel misunderstood isn't because others don't listen, but because even you don't fully understand the language of your own inner world. Imagine that. What if being misunderstood isn't a social problem, but a psychological necessity? What if it's not a curse, but a symptom of your mind evolving faster than the collective consciousness around you? There's a terrifying possibility here. Perhaps the feeling of being misunderstood is not proof of your alienation, but evidence of your authenticity. Maybe it's what happens when your inner reality no longer fits the narrow molds society provides. Still, that thought doesn't make the loneliness any easier to bear. It doesn't silence the late-night voice whispering, "No one will ever really get you." And yet, what if that voice isn't mocking you, but calling you towards something deeper? To understand why this ache exists, to uncover the psychological truth behind feeling misunderstood, you must first look beneath the surface, into the ancient architecture of the mind itself. Because the real answer doesn't live in other people's perception of you, it begins in the parts of yourself you've yet to meet. The feeling of being misunderstood is not a modern ailment, it's as old as human consciousness itself. From the moment you first became aware of your own thoughts, you began to separate from the world around you. The infant cries, not only from hunger, but from the unbearable realization that others cannot feel what it feels. That primal gap between inner experience and outer expression never truly closes. It simply becomes more sophisticated, more veiled, more tragic. Carl Jung called this the individuation process, the lifelong task of reconciling the conscious self with the unconscious depths. In Jung's view, the parts of you that remain unacknowledged, the shadow, the repressed, the unspoken, still influence every word you say and every silence you keep. But when those hidden forces try to surface, the world rarely welcomes them. Society teaches you to polish, to filter, to conform. It doesn't want your complexity, it wants your predictability. And so you split. One self for the world, another for the mirror. One that pleases, one that aches. Nietzsche warned that this split births a kind of psychological slavery. In striving to be understood, you begin to perform, to dilute the rawness of your thoughts so that they fit the moral grammar of the crowd. You stop speaking from your depths and start speaking for approval. You become fluent in the language of adaptation and lose the tongue of your own soul. That's the hidden tragedy of misunderstanding. It's not that others fail to understand you, it's that, slowly, you begin to misunderstand yourself. You start editing your personality, removing pieces that confuse others. You grow afraid of the intensity within you, the thoughts that don't fit, the emotions that spill over the social script. You call it being realistic, mature, or socially intelligent, but beneath it all, there's fear. Fear of rejection, fear of being too much, fear of being untranslatable. Arthur Schopenhauer once said that every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world. The same is true of understanding. Each person listens through the filter of their own pain, prejudice, and experience. You could speak the purest truth, and it would still reach someone else as distortion. They don't see you, they see their projection of you. And worse, you do the same to them. So what begins as a longing to connect turns into a hall of mirrors, each reflecting fragments, none showing the whole. This is why Sartre believed that hell is other people, not because people are cruel, but because in their gaze, we become an object, something defined, limited, named. The self, once infinite in private reflection, becomes confined in social interpretation. You can feel it in conversations where you play the role others expect, where your truth is simplified into a version they can digest. And yet, even as we resent this reduction, we depend on it. We crave the validation of being seen, even if imperfectly. We long for mirrors, even when they distort, because to be entirely unseen, to exist without recognition, feels like death. Here lies the great paradox. The more you yearn to be fully known, the more you reveal parts of yourself that others can never comprehend. The more authentic you become, the more alien you appear. The price of self-awareness is isolation. The deeper you go into your psyche, the fewer people you can bring with you. Aldous Huxley wrote that, the more powerful and original a mind, the more it will incline toward the religion of solitude. Perhaps the sense of being misunderstood is not a failure of communication, but a sign that your consciousness is stretching beyond the boundaries of the collective. Yet, there's a cost to this expansion, because while solitude might be sacred, it's also suffocating. You start to see the world not as a home, but as a foreign landscape filled with half-truths and surface-level noise. You begin to wonder if connection is even possible, or if understanding is merely a comforting illusion. We tell ourselves to survive the unbearable mystery of being alone in our own mind. But this isolation doesn't just wound the heart, it shapes the world around you in ways you can't yet see. The feeling of being misunderstood doesn't stay contained within you. It spills outward, shaping your relationships, your ambitions, even the culture you live in. And that's where the real danger begins. The feeling of being misunderstood doesn't just live in the mind, it seeps into everything you touch. It becomes the silent architect of your behavior, your relationships, your identity. Slowly, invisibly, it begins to dictate how you love, how you speak, and how you see the world. When you feel unseen long enough, you stop showing yourself. You build emotional armor, smiles that conceal, habits that distract, personas that protect. You become fluent in invisibility. The world praises your composure, your independence, your calm. But beneath that mask, you're starving for resonance, for recognition, for someone who can truly feel you rather than just observe you. At first, this hunger pushes you toward others. You chase intimacy, attention, validation. You give and give and give, hoping someone will finally understand. But when they don't, the hunger mutates into resentment. You begin to believe that no one is capable of understanding you, that people are shallow, that maybe you were never meant to belong. And that belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You withdraw further, convincing yourself it's self-protection, when in truth, it's self-erasure. Carl Jung warned that what we repress doesn't disappear, it returns in distorted forms. The parts of you that have been silenced begin to express themselves indirectly, through irritability, perfectionism, anxiety, or artistic obsession. You find yourself yearning for control, trying to shape reality into something that finally mirrors your inner truth. But life, stubborn and unpredictable, refuses to obey. And every time the world misunderstands you again, it reinforces your suspicion that maybe you're fundamentally different. This is where the shadow begins to feed. The unacknowledged parts of your psyche, your anger, your grief, your desire to be known, start to manifest in ways you can't recognize. Maybe you sabotage relationships that get too close. Maybe you numb yourself with work, substances, or constant stimulation. Maybe you cultivate superiority, convincing yourself that being misunderstood is proof of being above others, when deep down it's proof of how much you still ache to belong. The tragedy is that society rewards this alienation. Modern culture, as Huxley foresaw, thrives on disconnection. Individualism is sold as freedom, while conformity hides beneath the mask of choice. Social media amplifies misunderstanding. It trains us to communicate in fragments, to present curated selves that others misinterpret through their own filters of envy, insecurity, or projection. And yet, we keep playing along. We trade authenticity for approval, meaning for attention. We scroll through endless faces, each person shouting, "See me, understand me," but no one is listening. It's a collective theater of misunderstanding, where everyone performs and no one connects. Neuroscience sheds light on this tragedy. The human brain is wired for empathy, but also for bias. When we encounter someone, our mind instantly translates their behavior into our own emotional language. We don't perceive people as they are, we perceive them as extensions of our own stories. The result, true understanding becomes nearly impossible. Every interaction is a subtle negotiation between two illusions. Over time, this dissonance corrodes the soul. You begin to feel like a ghost inside your own life, half present, half performing. Conversations lose their depth. Relationships become strategic rather than sincere. Even solitude feels hollow, because your mind still craves the reflection of another consciousness to affirm your existence. And yet, beneath the despair, there's something else, something ancient stirring. The part of you that knows that meaning cannot come from being understood, but from understanding yourself. The ache of being unseen is trying to push you inward, back toward the source. But to follow that pull feels dangerous, like stepping into a wilderness with no map, no approval, no audience. Still, you can sense it, that faint whisper beneath the noise. Maybe this misunderstanding isn't a curse. Maybe it's an initiation, because when no one else can define you, you are finally free to define yourself. But that freedom comes with a cost. It demands that you confront everything you've avoided: your shadows, your illusions, your craving for validation. And this is where the rebellion begins. Rebellion doesn't always begin with rage. Sometimes, it begins with a quiet refusal, the decision to stop apologizing for being difficult to understand. The moment you stop contorting yourself into a shape the world can easily digest, you begin to reclaim your authenticity. This is not the rebellion of noise or defiance. It's a rebellion of truth. To break free from the curse of being misunderstood, you must first stop seeking permission to exist as you are. Because every time you ask the world to validate your inner life, you give it the power to define you. Understanding, in its deepest sense, cannot be received, it must be lived. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But most people never cash in that privilege. They spend their days constructing identities that fit within the narrow architecture of acceptance. The real revolution begins when you dare to live without that safety net, when you stop performing and start revealing. That means you will be misunderstood, perhaps even more than before. But this time, it won't wound you. It will liberate you, because what you are rebelling against isn't society itself, it's the internalized belief that you must be understood to be real. Think of Nietzsche, standing alone against the moral conventions of his time, proclaiming that God is dead. He wasn't attacking faith, he was confronting complacency. His rebellion was spiritual. He sought to awaken the individual from collective sleep. His words were misinterpreted, distorted, even vilified, but they endured. Because truth does not require consensus. That is the essence of psychological freedom. To live by inner necessity, not out of validation. But how do you reach that point? First, you must descend into silence, not the passive silence of avoidance, but the active silence of self-listening. Withdraw from the noise long enough to hear the subtle pulse beneath your thoughts. Ask yourself, who am I when no one is watching? When no one is there to misunderstand me? This solitude is not punishment, it's purification. It burns away everything false. It reveals how much of your personality was built merely to be accepted. Second, you must reclaim the language of your inner world. The misunderstood often struggle not because they lack clarity, but because they've been forced to speak in a dialect that doesn't belong to them. Rediscover your own voice, the one that isn't shaped by fear of judgment. Write, create, express, without translation. Let your art, your speech, your silence speak the language of your soul. Third, confront your shadow, the parts of you that you've hidden, even from yourself. The misunderstood often carry deep reservoirs of unexpressed emotion, anger, grief, intensity, longing. They fear that revealing these will make them too much, but repressing them only ensures permanent disconnection. Jung taught that the shadow, once integrated, becomes the source of creativity and vitality. When you stop fighting what you are, you stop demanding that others understand what they never could. Finally, you must surrender your obsession with being known. Not because it's wrong to want connection, but because true connection only happens when you no longer need it to validate your existence. When you no longer plead to be seen, you become magnetic. Paradoxically, the moment you stop chasing understanding is the moment real understanding becomes possible. This is the rebellion that no one teaches. To step outside the economy of validation, to exist as your own authority, to let misunderstanding become a kind of sacred shield protecting your individuality. When Schopenhauer wrote that, "The world is my representation," he meant that everything you perceive, including misunderstanding, is a reflection of your own inner state. The rebellion, then, is not against others' failure to understand you, but against your own failure to understand yourself through them. Every misinterpretation, every rejection, becomes an invitation to know who you are beyond your roles. Breaking free means realizing that the point of life is not to be understood, it's to understand. Because when you grasp that truth, the need for external recognition dissolves. You no longer look for mirrors, you become one. And from that freedom, something extraordinary emerges. Peace. Yet, even peace has its own paradox, because once you find it, You start to see everything: the world, others, and even misunderstanding itself with new eyes. And that vision leads to the final truth. Imagine one final moment of clarity after all the confusion, the years of speaking without being heard, the countless nights wondering if you were simply too different to belong. You stop searching for understanding and notice something strange. The silence that once felt empty now feels vast. The loneliness that once crushed you begins to shimmer with meaning. You realize that being misunderstood was never your enemy. It was your teacher. The ache that once haunted you was trying to show you something most people spend their entire lives running from. That the self cannot be captured in words, nor fully seen through another's eyes. It is too fluid, too infinite. The attempt to be completely understood is, in truth, a longing to be contained, to turn your living complexity into a static reflection. And that would be a kind of death. This is the paradox of selfhood. To be fully alive, you must remain partially misunderstood. Carl Jung hinted at this when he said that loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. The pain of that inability drives you inward toward integration, toward the discovery of the inner self that requires no witness to be real. The more you embody this truth, the less you need the world to mirror it. You begin to see that the desire to be understood was never about others, it was about recognition. You wanted to be seen because you had not yet seen yourself. Once you do, others' misunderstandings become harmless, even necessary. They remind you that you are something larger than anyone's perception. Nietzsche once wrote, "And those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music." That's what it means to awaken, to hear the music of your own existence. While the world remains deaf to its rhythm, you no longer resent their deafness, you understand it, you even forgive it. Because once you hear that music, you realize how rare it is. In this light, the misunderstood are not broken, they are merely living ahead of their time. They are translators of the unseen, poets of the subconscious, travelers of inner worlds. And as with all pioneers, their language is not immediately understood by those who still live within the familiar. The deeper truth, then, is this: to be misunderstood is the cost of becoming whole. You see, most people fragment themselves to belong. They shrink their inner life to fit social expectations, mistaking approval for love. But wholeness requires the opposite. It demands that you risk misunderstanding for the sake of truth. It demands solitude, courage, and a willingness to live without applause. When you reach that point, something miraculous happens. The need to explain dissolves. You stop justifying your feelings, your choices, your existence. You simply are, and in that quiet being, you find a serenity that no amount of external validation could ever give. From this state, connection returns, but it's different now. It's not built on mutual understanding, but mutual presence. You no longer need others to see you clearly, you simply allow them to be. And in doing so, you finally see them not through projection or expectation, but through awareness. This is the highest form of understanding, not intellectual agreement, but compassionate perception. The irony is beautiful. Once you stop demanding to be understood, you become capable of understanding everything. The very pain that isolated you becomes the doorway to empathy. You begin to sense the hidden loneliness in others, the masks they wear, the small betrayals they commit against themselves just to be accepted. And suddenly, you no longer feel so alone. You realize that misunderstanding is universal, that every human soul lives slightly out of sync with the world. And so, the final truth unfolds. You were never meant to be perfectly understood. You were meant to express, to become, to evolve. You are not a message to be decoded, you are a mystery to be lived. The moment you embrace that mystery, you step beyond the need for translation. You stop chasing mirrors and start walking toward the light of your own becoming. And as you do, something within whispers, not with desperation, but with peace. They don't need to understand you, you finally do.